Well, it looks like we have about 16 people here, so let's get started. Um, unlike previous sessions, I don't have any slides prepared. I just wanted to get together and talk about what is strategy for a race and how do you create it? How do you decide what your plan is for the race? And so I've asked a few other people here who are experienced sailors and leaders in their fleets. And I was hoping you guys would share some of your secrets with us. So does anybody here have an opinion of what a race strategy is and how do you formulate your race strategy?
We know proper course is the course you take to finish the race in absence of other boats. And I think your strategy is your onset of it. My strategy starts 3 days ahead of the actual day, looking at the weather and what I expect. And then I formulate a strategy once I get on the race course, and I look at the favorite size and all that. But then tactics come in when you're around 10 to 20 boats that want to mess up your strategy. So that's kind of how I play it out.
Any other opinions? Alan? Linda?
Yeah, okay. Kind of like Bart said, I'll start by checking the weather a day or two, or especially the day, usually the night before, looking at the various windy and wind finder and sail flow, whatever I can find. Is the wind predicted to be shifting? So is there going to be a persistent veer or a persistent back? And so that influences somewhat in the back of my mind which may be the favored side of the course. On a good day, I get out to the course, ahead of time, half an hour to an hour ahead of time, and sail around, sail upwind, check what the conditions are. On a bad day, I'm rushing and get there, hopefully in time for the first gun. But nonetheless, I check who my competition is. Who do I want to be aware of? Who do I need to, who's going to be my close competition? But also, who do I need to watch out for? There are some boats that don't always pay attention to what's going on, or there's one windmill sailor that I can think of in particular that likes to pinch and will point you up, luff you up at the starting line. So I just either stay away from him or be sure I don't get stuck on his quarter on the windward side, because he's going to point higher than me and make me go slower, if not force me over the line. So that's a part of it. Try to take some time to run the line, figure out how much time it takes to get from one end to the other, especially if I'm thinking about a pin in start, so I know when to hot it up to make that final run. Especially with a multi-hull, really still learning how to judge how quickly the boat accelerates. So as innumerable times I think it's time to go, and all of a sudden I'm on the line, not realizing how quick the boat takes off and gets there. So that's still a learning curve for me. Beyond that, just watching, have the idea, oh, I want to go right, I want to go left, try to make that happen, assuming that, like Bart said, other boats don't get in my way. And paying attention on the first upwind leg, which seemed to be favored, so that that strategy gets adjusted as the race proceeds. What seemed to be a good idea on the first weather leg, maybe it wasn't so good on the second weather leg, and so you go to the other side of the course or up the middle, whatever. In a nutshell, that's kind of how I think about it.
So how do you choose which side of the course to go to?
Considerations of where it appears to be the windiest. If it looks like the wind is going to be clocking or veering, as they say, I will plan to try to go right to catch the header first, and then get on the lifted tack coming into the mark, so I'd end up with the great circle route. And watching which side has the most wind. If there's places where the current is consideration, that comes into play. sometimes it's watching other fleets that start ahead, if I'm fortunate enough to be in a place that I can do that.
Bart, I see you holding a thumbs up, and
We watch the
Jim,
isotopes a
I see
lot.
you nodding. Can you two chime in?
Well, we watch the isotopes a lot, see what they do. And hopefully you guys are on the ball and you're heading in the right direction. But yeah, we watch other fleets, we watch other boats, we test the course, we go upwind, and at the expense of not being able to get back to the starting line in time for our start, it's more important to feel the windward leg out. So it's a fine line of being able to come back and make your start versus feeling how the course lays out. So you do have to get out there ahead of time and just almost sail to the windward mark and just feel the lake. A lot of these lakes are small. Most of us are lake sailors, and so things shift so quickly. I mean, you can have a plan to go where one side's favored, one tack's favored at the start. I mean, I've been on starts where starboard's favored in the last second, port becomes super favored. So you can't really commit to a 2-minute run to the committee boat on starboard because starboard was favored. I get near the middle of the line and play around and feel it and constantly test it. And as the countdown's going on, just to make sure that everything's still playing out the way it is. But there have been times where I've had to blast off to the pin end and tack on port and lead the fleet to the windward mark on one tack, because you just can't commit on a lake to a plan that far in advance. It could change in 2 minutes. So that's just me.
Alan and Bart, JP is asking, how important are the flags? JP, you want to elaborate a little bit on the question? You got to take it off mute.
He's muted. The button. Push the button.
Or hold down the space bar.
It doesn't help to say, I'm muted. I'm muted.
There, he's got it.
I just noticed, Alan, I agree with everything you're saying. From the time you leave the beach to the time the first gun's up, you're collecting data everywhere you can, including just knowing your competition personality-wise. Who hits the line or who's more important for it to get positioned. A question to you, Alan, because you're such a successful sailor. How important are the flags on the race committee boat? Do you try to look up wind and take a look at the windward mark, see if it's flopping one side or the other? See the race committee boat go by, see which way the flag's hanging off it?
I'm usually not very aware of that. I mean, other than class flag went up, the blue flag went up, and I mean the prep flag. Possibly, I mean, if there's other boats like Bart's up checking out the weather leg, I might go the other way and just kind of watch him, watch what other boats are doing. In the middle of the race, you know, as the race progresses, watching other boats will help give clues as to where the wind might be shifting and anticipating modifying the strategy, which way to go.
Is there particular isotopes that you watch going up north? You watch Eric?
Oh, of course. I watch you, but also whoever's around. I mean, both.
Whoever gets there first. Okay.
Well, any boat that's ahead of me, going upwind, and I guess conversely going downwind. Watching them, if you say, hey, that boat, or off to one side, that boat's getting a huge lift, or that boat just got headed. All right, they got headed. I'm expecting that header, so I'm going to be ready to tack on it a little bit sooner when I hit that puff, because I know what it's going to do. And hopefully I'll gain a boat length or two on the boat that rode into the header.
This is Scott. Just a question to the more experienced racers. How much in your strategy do you weigh getting a good start and the implications of that versus trying to make it up on the other legs?
Well, Buddy Melga's strategy is start first and extend your lead. Always try to get a good start, at least I do. Not always successful. Although there's times that I will, and I don't know if this comes into tactics or strategy, if I really want to start at the boat, I might take a second or third start and let the people that are fighting at it go for it. If somebody's right at the boat, I'll wait till they go off, and then I'll come up and tack right in front of the boat to get over to the right side of the course. I'd rather be a little bit late to get where I want to go. Also, a lot of times there's the crowd at the boat, and they'll be early, and so they'll drift down. All of a sudden, a hole will open up, and if I've been hanging back, then I can slip in that hole.
Alan, I think that might be a tactic to get to your strategy. Eric?
Well, I feel that my strategy for the race dictates how I want to start, not the other way around. In my opinion, my strategy is how do I want to sail the race and where I want to be on the race course, what I want to be looking for, how much risk do I want to manage. Now, those all go into my strategy, and then that plays into how I choose to try to start. Jim, do you have an opinion?
Like what Bart said, I try to hang around the middle also because the lakes are so changeable, and whether I'm going to go left or right, I really don't know until I see what the wind is going to do in that last minute or two. In terms of the overall strategy, I'm really trying to make sure the boat is set up before I leave the dock or shortly thereafter, instead of waiting until 1 minute before the start. It's taken me all these years to realize I've got to have everything working gear-wise as part of the strategy, so I'm not distracted at the last minute with a minor problem of the main sheet wrong or the Cunningham. So those are some of my strategy things there.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of good.
I think wind speed has something to.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of good inputs in that you have to plan ahead, see what you think, well, what the weather forecast is, whether or not you actually believe that's going to happen, but use that as sort of something in the background, making sure your boat is set up right, realizing who your competitors are and how they are going to interact with your racing, watching things while they're happening on the water because conditions change, watching what other boats and other fleets do if they start before you, because that will give you information. And JP, I do look at the flags on the committee boat quite a bit when I'm sailing around before the start, because that's a very easy indication for me to see, is the course currently starboard or port favored, and is the line currently starboard or port favored? So there's a lot of different things you need to look at. Does anybody else have more input on how they decide how they want to sail the course?
Anne-Marie?
I've got one comment. If it's a one-day regatta, it's different than a 2 or 3 or 4 day regatta. And your strategy is going to change as you go through the week and depending on your position. And then you go back to what Alan said. Who's out there? Who do you have to watch? Who do you have to stay with on day 3 or day 4?
Right, there's definitely, early on in the regatta, you want to manage your risk. And later on in the regatta, your strategy might just be, I need to beat this guy, so I'm just going to stick with him. In fact, in one of our earlier sessions, somebody said his race strategy was just to follow Bart. Because he knew that Bart always got good starts and always picked the right side of the course. That's one reason I wanted
9
Bart
out of 10.
to
You
tell
don't
us
want to
how
be
he
behind
does
me
it.
on that one start.
I like to look at the race.
Anne Marie?
9 out
Go
of
ahead,
10
Todd.
starts.
Go ahead, Todd.
I like to look at the SIs in advance. It'll tell me a couple things. One, it could tell you the potential course, and then you can form a strategy around that as you look at the forecast. And then two, it also tells you important things about penalties and if you run aground, that kind of thing. I want to keep that in mind. And then the day of the race, I look at the weather to decide. And I sail in the ocean, so I have to also look at the tide and the currents. So that's important. And then also at the start, I'll do a couple wind shots to see which side is favored. I like to wind start where possible, and just form the strategy the day of the race, have the right sailors on board for the wind, and go from there.
Okay, good comment on checking the tide. Most of us are inland lake sailors and we don't bother looking at the tide tables. And also, again, you mentioned something that reminded me of something that Jim said, which is having the boat set up and tuned properly for the conditions. I don't really consider that strategy, but you can't win without speed. And speed and boat handling are a crucial underpinning of strategy and tactics. The strategy and tactics won't matter if your boat isn't tuned properly or if you aren't able to handle it well.
If there are potential wind shifts during the day, I like to look at what time they are, or if there are increases forecasted, I like to know that and have the sails ready, which is more of a tactic. But big picture, I like to know when the wind is going to change and what direction it's going to change so I can be prepared for it, especially on longer races.
Dale or Anne Marie, do you have anything to add to that?
I sail in mixed fleets with often quite a few Flying Scots, and I have a Wayfarer, so my sail's much smaller. So on the start, I always go for clear air. I don't care whether it's pin end or boat end. I just want clear air so I can get out there. My main strategy is to beat Jim, and my tactic is to get in front of him and stay there.
What was your tactic?
Get in front of Jim and stay there.
So Jim's tactic is to push you over early. Go
Yes,
ahead,
I don't get near him because he will push me over early, which is part of the game. But I try to, he's my main competitor. It's always fun to beat your mentor.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think strategy is your plan before you go out to the course. I think it includes a lot of things, including setup, mindset. If you're going to follow people around, that's fine. If your goal is to win the regatta, that's a different strategy. You have to be prepared for a lot of things when you get out there. And in my opinion, that's the tactics. You learn the wind direction, you learn the side that is favored, you begin to develop a plan for getting on the line. If you're not on the line, you're not going to beat the big guys. Very rarely will you catch the big guys. So if you want to follow somebody around the course, you're going to say, okay, I don't mind being number 2 to this guy. As you get further into a regatta, as sort of Jim said, over more days, your strategy may change. Let's say you had a terrible first day or something like that. Then you got a different strategy. On the last race, if you're leading, your strategy may be to hold off one guy or 2 guys. So you got to go out to the course with a mindset prepared for what's going on. Charlie and I race in a lot of regional regattas and occasionally a North American. We sail a lot against a lot of good guys. And you just can't go out there and you say, well, let's see how the best we can do. You got to be sort of really geared up to plan, get to the line, know which side is favored, and find that hole and really go about it. If your strategy is to go out and have fun, Ray and I have sailed a bunch of times, and our strategy on the, for club racing was just go out and have a good time sailing around.
So how do you determine which side of the course is favored? Or whether you want to go up the middle or which side? Anybody?
In lake sailing, it's so shifty that for many years, my main strategy was to start off on starboard and go until I get headed and then tack. And that worked great. Till one day it didn't shift and I didn't know when to tack. But go till I get headed and then I tack. That's my usual strategy. And it seems to work pretty good. But I think I need to go beyond that in my thinking in the near future.
Okay, any other ideas?
Again, depending on the conditions, what I observe in my sailing around beforehand, and also the weather forecasts. If it's often quick lake, lake sailing that's oscillating, especially quickly oscillating shifts and maries, you attack on the headers and you work your way up the middle. You don't want to go on a flyer out to one corner or the other. You might get caught up in antlers or something. If it's especially more of an open water and the shifts are more oscillating or maybe even persistent, which I might have picked up by looking at the weather forecasts, then you choose a right or a left, anticipating that you're going to get headed, and then you want to take the header first and then sail the longer leg on the hopefully lifted tack as that persistent shift comes in. Maybe a front's coming through. Maybe you're sailing where you've got sea breeze considerations to deal with. What else? Upwind. I mean, that's the kind of basic persistent versus oscillating shifts. If there appears to be more wind on one side of the course than the other, that certainly will influence which side you go to. And current if you're in places that you have to deal with current.
Okay, I think, Alan, you've said a lot of really good stuff in there. Some years ago, I read Stuart Walker's book, Positioning. Has anybody heard of that one? It's a really good book on race strategy, but it's very hard to read because of Stuart Walker's style. He tends to repeat himself a lot, and it can get tough to wade through it. But I boil his book down into there's three basic conditions that affect your strategy, or how you form your strategy, where you want to be on the race course. And the first one, and I'm not going by his numbering, I'm just going by how I remember them. The first case is when there's some particular reason for you to go to a specific spot on the course. And that could be more wind. It could be you're sailing in an offshore race and the winds are light and you want to go inshore to try to catch an onshore breeze. Or it might be mid-afternoon and you want to go offshore to try to catch the sea breeze when it comes in. Or it might be you're sailing in a river or in a harbor and there's current. And you want to go where there's either favorable current or you want to avoid adverse current. That's very big if you're sailing in the Savannah area. If you're in the Wilmington River, current plays a big role in where you want to be. If you're sailing in Charleston Harbor, you can pretty much ignore the wind and simply sail based on where there's adverse or favorable current. In fact, we saw that at the Sunfish Worlds. The leaders in the Sunfish Worlds all sailed up the James Island side of the course. Anybody who went out into the middle of the harbor lost. In terms of lake sailing, sometimes on our little inland lakes, there's a great big hole in the middle of the lake. And if you go up the middle, you're going to get stuck in it. And so you pretty much have to pick one side or the other. I'm reminded of a race that Jolene and I were in at Jordan Lake several years ago, where as we were sailing out to the race course, we noticed that we kept sailing into less and less wind. There was simply more wind on the left side of the race course, and the farther left we went, the more wind there was. So we said, we want to start on starboard tack at the pin and go all the way left. All the way left to the left corner and tack. And that paid off huge for us. We were sailing the Tanzer, and we came in second, boat for boat, against all the other boats racing. So when there's a particular reason to go to one place or another, then that's what you want to do. Another case where you might want to go to a specific spot is if you're sailing in a small lake like Lake Townsend and the shore effects are significant. You might go to a certain place because you know the shore is going to bend the wind. And once you get there, it's going to give you a shift. Okay, so that's the first case. There's a specific reason to go to a specific place. The second case is when there is oscillating or randomly shifting wind back and forth. On the lakes I normally sail, I almost never see true oscillating wind, where the wind goes back and forth on a specific time schedule. I normally only see that when I go to the coast. But in that case, what you want to do is stick towards the middle of the course and tack on the shifts. You don't want to get too far out to one side or the other, because if you get an unfavorable shift, you can lose big. In fact, most of the how to win at racing books say stay away from the corners at all costs because they're too dangerous. And nobody goes to the corners. In fact, in Dave Perry's book, Dave Dellenbaugh drew a cartoon of a boat sailing up to a signpost. It said, "Welcome to Cornersville, population 1." So they're all talking about that situation. So if you're in a situation where where the wind is simply going back and forth, you want to stick to the middle and tack on the shifts so that you're always able to take advantage of a wind shift when it comes. You're never too far out to one side where you have to eat the header. And I think, Anne-Marie, that was your default condition. Start on the favored tack, and whenever you get a header, tack. So the third condition, which Alan also mentioned, is when you have a persistent shift. That is, the wind is going in one direction and it's going to keep going in that direction. And sometimes you can notice that that's going to happen based on the wind forecast, if there's a storm front coming in, or if the sea breeze is going to come in. You see that a lot in places like Miami, where, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the wind is going to go a certain direction. So if you're sailing in a persistent shift, you want to do the opposite. You want to sail the unfavored tack first. This may seem counterintuitive, but if the wind is going to keep shifting, you want to take your knock when it's small and take your lift when it's big. So sail the unfavored tack first when it's only slightly unfavored, and then when you get to the ley line tack, remember that the ley line may keep moving, so it may be even before you get there, tack, and sail the persistent shift for the big gain. That makes sense to people?
Well, you definitely want to tack early before you get to the lay line for that reason.
Right. If the wind is going to keep shifting, the ley line is going to come to you. So tack before you're actually there. Has anybody ever sailed up to a windward mark and you're getting close to the ley line and you're getting ready to tack and you get lifted? And so you have to sail further and then you get lifted again. And the further you sail, the more you get lifted until eventually you've sailed 50 yards past the mark and you have to tack and sail back towards it from above.
Is that what we call the core? Is that what we call the cold vortex?
Well, no, but that's sort of the opposite condition. You keep getting headed no matter which way you come at it.
I thought that was the great
That's
circle
typically
route.
But many times, maybe not a few times at least, it's happened to me. I've come up to the mark and I'm getting ready to tack and the wind shifts the opposite way of what I want. So I am stuck on the wrong side of a persistent shift, and it usually costs a lot of boats. The trick is when you get in that situation.
Usually at Lake Town, it's usually at Lake Townsend.
It happens to me at Lake Townsend. It happens to me at Carr Lake too.
Mm-hmm.
And all of
More
that.
Lake Townsend, going towards the.
So what's the trick?
The key is if you get caught on the wrong side of a persistent shift is to recognize it's happening early and bail when the penalty is small before the penalty gets bigger, because the longer you stick on the wrong side of a persistent shift, the farther behind you get. Much like starting underneath somebody, underneath a line of boats. The longer you sail on in a bad position, the worse your position gets. So when you find yourself in a bad spot, even if it goes against your strategy or against the tactics you want to do, you need to get out first, get back into the position where you're free to pursue your strategy as quickly as you can. Now, like I said, if you want to go to one side of the course or the other to sail the race, that affects how you want to start. Like I said, in that race where Jolene and I were in the Tanzer, everybody else always tried to win the committee boat. So there was a big pile of boats on starboard tack at the committee boat, all slowing each other down. And we said, well, we want to go left. So let's start at the pin end. That's as left as we can start. We're already in better wind there and sailing into even stronger wind. So we started on starboard at the pin end all by ourselves. And as Alan said earlier, if he wants to go right, then sometimes rather than starting in the middle of the line and then not being able to tack because there's a bunch of boats on your starboard quarter, start one or two boats behind at the pin end. Yes, you don't get as good a start, but you are free to tack away and go where you want to go. Dave Dellenbaugh, he always talks about, choosing where you want to start on the starting line, but from what I understand, he almost always starts in the middle. If you can't decide which way is the way you want to go, then probably the best default decision is try to start in the middle of the line and tack on the shifts.
Well, the most important thing is to be on the front row. If you're in the second row, you have to be on the front row. That gains you everything. If you're behind boats, it just loses you everything. So I will fight to get on the line, no matter if it's down the line, middle of the line, just to be in the wind. If you're, and I know not everybody wants to get up there and mix it up, but if you want to get a good start, you have to be in good wind. And if you're behind boats in the second row, it's just going to be tough for you.
Except for, I'm going to try to push you over the line.
I'll be pushing the guy ahead of me to windward of me to carve out a hole. So there'll be plenty of room to leeward of me. That's why we're not mean people. We're just protecting somebody from you coming up and trying to sneak up under us and push us. We're not mean people. We're just protecting our space.
Okay, we could probably have a full hour discussion on tactics at the starting line. But that wasn't really the topic I'd hoped to cover tonight. I wanted to talk about how do you decide where you want to be.
But that's a strategy at the start.
So one of the challenges of
That's
setting
a
a
strategy at the starting line.
I agree with you in all cases except when you want to go right and it's crowded at the boat. Then you can start second line and tack away. But that's the only exception.
It also makes a difference to what kind of sailing you're doing. Jolene said earlier, strategy is different for one design or handicap racing. And I kind of said, well, no, I don't really want to get into that. But in terms of where you want to start on the line, certainly that comes into play. If I'm sailing an isotope, I'm the fastest boat in the fleet. So I just want to jump out, get in a lane of clear air, and know that I'm going to sail away from all the other boats. But if Jolene and I are sailing the Tanzer, well, we're the slowest boat in the fleet. And no matter how good a start we get, everybody else is going to roll us shortly afterwards. So our choice of where and how to start is as much about preserving an escape route.
Clear air.
So we may very well say, yeah, we're going to let the Flying Scots start in front of us because we're just going to tack away as soon as we can. So especially if the right side of the course is favored, that's definitely what we want to do on the Tanzer.
One of the biggest challenges I've had transitioning from monohulls to multi-hulls is multi-hulls don't tack quite as quickly. A tack is very expensive in a multi-hull, more so on a Hobie or an isotope than it is on the Weta, but nonetheless, it costs more to tack away, which encourages heading out to the corners, which, again, how do you manage the risk of going one tack until you reach the ley line and tacking to come into the mark, which I see, which multi-hulls tend to do a lot. So, Eric, how do you judge how much to tack and when do you go all the way to the corner to find the ley line?
There are several isotope sailors who will sail all the way to the corner and tack. And I often try to do 2 tacks instead of just one, so that I'm not trying to judge the ley line from a quarter of a mile away. But there are times if the wind is shifty, I will tack on the shifts. Yes, it costs probably a minimum of 3 boat lengths to tack a catamaran, even if you pull it off perfectly. But being on the headed tack for too long can cost you more than that. We'll certainly be less likely to tack, more likely to hold on for a little while in a header to see if it will go away before tacking. But we do still sometimes tack up the middle. Although I think you are right, most of the times we just sail to the corners and try to get in 1 or 2 tacks. And that's, as I said earlier, sometimes there's a hole in the middle of the lake and you want to go to a side anyway. So at that point, the strategy is all about, well, which side am I going to pick? And that's where either doing your homework and hoping that the weather forecast is right, or sailing around before the start and just seeing where the better wind is. That's a huge part of it for me, is while I'm on my way out to the race course, I'm paying a lot of attention to what the wind is like.
Froze up. There he goes.
You unfroze. You
Okay,
froze
where
up
did-
at doing your homework and hope the weather forecast is right.
Okay, so you can either do your homework and hope the weather forecast is right, and by that choose a favored side, or what I do is while I'm sailing out to the race course, I pay a lot of attention to what the wind is like. And I'll tack back and forth and sail across the lake around the starting area, or around the sailing area. And if I have time, I'll sail up towards where the weather mark might be and back, all trying to keep a mental note of, are there any bends in the wind? Are there any shifts going on? Are the shifts on any sort of schedule? Or where is the wind simply better? And that'll all play into how I formulate my strategy for that start.
So Eric actually said he doesn't sail up to the weather mark much, and Bart said it's very important to actually try to make sure you can scrape out the time to sail towards the weather mark.
I'll sail towards it. I don't usually sail all the way there. Usually, contrary to what other people have said, and kind of what I've said a little bit already, I usually don't pay much attention to the forecast. It's so often wrong that I just show up and sail in whatever wind is there. I make my decisions about what the wind on the course is like based on what I see, not on what the forecast is. And also, usually I'm one of the last boats off the beach because I want to save my energy for the race. I don't want to sail around for an hour and a half and get tired out before the race. So usually I'm sailing out and I'll look at the other boats and see what they're doing and pay attention to what the weather's like on my way to the race course. That's sort of my approach at a regular club race. Now, certainly if it's an invitational regatta, my strategy for the first race in the Iced Up Nationals is going to be very different than my strategy for the last race. The first races, I'm going to be conservative. I'm not going to want to make a big mistake early on and have to try to dig myself out of a hole. I'll be happy with a top so many boats finish, and I'm not trying to win, I'm just trying to finish near the top. Because in my experience in the Iced Up Nationals, if you finish 5th or better in every race, you're probably going to win the event. You can win the Nationals without winning any of the races. Although there are some where, there are a few events where you have to do better than in the top 5. But so towards the end of a regatta, if I'm in the lead, or if there's a boat I need to beat, or a boat that I just need to not let 2 boats in between us, if he finishes first and I finish second, I still win. I'm happy to just stick with him and make sure that no boats get in between us. So my strategy can be, at the end of the race, can just be stick with a certain boat. Whereas at the beginning of the regatta, it's going to be, don't get caught up in the pack at the committee boat. Don't try to win the committee boat. Just get a good start in clear air and get be in the lead pack at the weather mark. And usually if one side of the course is favored upwind, the same side is favored downwind. And conditions can change during a race. So if I go to one side and somebody went to the other side and he beat me, then I'll probably go back to the other side. I'll do what the person who did better does or did. Or if I see a shift coming through, I may change my strategy and say, okay, conditions have changed. I have to do something different.
So for those on the call who are new to sailing, new to racing, you're going to have goals for your races, and then think about your strategy for making those goals. So Eric, do you kind of want to speak to when you first started racing, what your goal was and what your strategy was for meeting that goal?
Well, it seems to me that everybody else, when they start racing at least, does a whole lot better than I did when I started. Because when I first started racing, since I'd grown up sailing, I thought, oh, I know how to do this. You know, I'll just jump in the boat and I'll show these people something. And for most of the first year that I raced, race committee had to come by and say, Eric, everybody else is already finished. Can you not go around that last mark and just come back to the starting area so we can start another race? So at the very beginning, my goal was to not embarrass myself, was to learn how to sail, keep up with the fleet, not make everybody wait. And then it became...
Eric?
Yeah, JP?
You were not conservative trying to learn this game. You went all out every race you've ever got on the boat out on there. You've hit every person in the fleet the first 2 or 3 years.
I don't think I hit everybody. I certainly hit you once or twice.
Oh, you never held back on anything when it came to sailing. You're a wonderful. I can't believe that you've come so far, really. But a lot of that is you tend to remember what bad things happened, and you just don't do that anymore. Like I'm still learning, but I do remember you the early years, and the fact that you won the nationals many times was not in your head, and we didn't think about it that much the first couple of years. You hit everybody. You were super aggressive. We were protesting you. I don't think you fully understood what was going on, but like I said, you're one guy that doesn't make the same mistake twice, and have done very well at sailing. Very well at sailing. So
well, hopefully I learned from my early mistakes. Like I said, most other people don't do the stupid things I did, or they simply know how to sail better than I did. But at one point, you know, once I started finishing ahead of the monohulls, and I felt that was a point of shame that the monohulls were beating me boat for boat. I kind of staked out my position as tail end Charlie in the ice stope fleet, and so I picked the person who was, you know, the guy who normally finished right in front of me, and I tried to figure out how to beat him. And I sailed, and I tried to improve my boat handling and speed until I could routinely beat that person, and then I set my sights on the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Until one year I set my sights on Alan Wolfe. And all that year I kept trying to beat Alan, and I simply couldn't. He was always finishing right in front of me. And then I realized that we were both passing other boats, and he was doing the same thing. We were just both getting better together. Then I got to a point where I wasn't getting any better, and I wasn't winning any races, and I was getting very frustrated. And I was thinking about, you know, stopping sailing for a while because it just wasn't being fun anymore. So I changed my approach completely, and I said, I'm not going to pay attention to where I finish. I don't care where I am relative to anybody else. I'm just going to go out, try to sail the boat well, and have fun. So like Dale said earlier, sometimes your strategy is just go out and have fun. So that year I said, forget trying to win because I'm not winning. I hadn't won a race yet. Forget making winning being the goal, make fun the goal. And then suddenly I started winning. So fun is not dependent on winning for me. Winning, it follows it being fun. But that's not really my strategy.
When I first
So on
started,
my end, the first year I skippered, my goal was to make it around the windward mark. So I actually celebrated when I finally was able to make it around the windward mark. Then my next goal was to beat somebody else. So for those who are new to the racing and sailing side of stuff, just keep in mind that your goals, are going to be different than some of what you're hearing on the call. Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
When I first started racing, I would tell my crew, our goal is to start, finish, and stay out of the way. Because I didn't want to interfere with people who were intent on winning and messing up their day when me doing a turn wasn't helping them at all. And that was great. And as I was doing those three things, I was also paying attention to how other people were sailing and picking up ideas and ways to do things. And I gradually got better and better. And then I started mixing it up, especially on the start line, getting up there in the front. And so, like everybody else is saying, as you improve, your goals change. And now I'm getting near where Eric is, where if I try too hard to win, I forget thinking about how I'm sailing. So when I go out to sail, I don't think about winning at all. It doesn't go into my head in any way. What I think about is, how do I sail the best I can in this second, in this 30-second interval? Because within a few seconds, the whole situation will change. So your mind has to be constantly adapting. And I think the crews that recognize that something has changed and adapt to it the quickest are the ones that ultimately win, because they don't go too far out on the head, or they don't go too far this way or that way. They're constantly thinking, what has changed and how do I need to react to it? And when you're doing all that, there's no brain power left to think about winning. So I just think about how to sail the best I can in every minute, every second of the race. And then at the end, I realize, oh, I did well.
I think traveling to regattas is a good way to, I've learned a lot by going to big regattas and sailing against people that are a whole bunch better than me. Flying Scots are really good for that. If you go to the away regattas where there are other people, I've learned things. I've learned things in the past 5 years about how to walk the ladder going to windward, about just starting tactics, all kinds of different things, keeping your boat speed up. There was one sailor that said, that the question at the little chat after the regatta or after the race day, you were doing well. What did you do? He said, I just sailed the boat fast. And he was sailing the boat fast and doing really well. So, talking to people in the parking lot, socially distancing while you're doing it, and just, watching what the people that are sailing faster, maybe you can follow them for a minute or two and say, okay, what are they doing? Oh, that. All of a sudden, I'd figure out, do that little thing, and the boat all of a sudden takes off and moves faster. So it's constantly learning. I've been doing this since I was 13 years old is when I learned to sail, and kind of like a lot of the rest of you, just if my dad and I sailed together, and if we could get around the course, and then, okay, well, we beat one boat, and then we beat two boats, and that progression, it's a common story I hear a lot, but I'm still learning things all the time, which is one of the great things about this sport for me is I can still learn, and I can still teach others and turn them on to the sport too.
Good points, Alan. When I was sailing and I was sort of in the mid-pack, I noticed there were times when I could keep up with the top sailors. I could keep up with them for a minute or so, and then they would pull away from me. And so I said to myself, well, I know that I can sail as fast as they do. I just need to try to sail at that fast more, a greater percentage of the time. So it was a lot of working on keeping my boat going fast once I'd gotten to a point where I was fast.
I have a question about speed. Speed is one thing, but there's also distance. So and I know there are many factors, the direction of the wind, how everything is placed, and the changes in the wind, but how do you decide in terms of how many times you'll tack to have a shorter distance that might not be as fast? Does it make sense to anyone what I'm asking?
Velocity made good. She's asking about velocity made good.
So what do you think,
Eric?
Anne-Marie?
Gee.
Well, does anybody have an answer for Marie?
Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Like you were about to say, Alan, it depends on your boat. As you gain more experience, you recognize how much speed you gain versus how much extra distance that you travel on a different, doing it one way versus the other. So it's sort of an experience thing. There's no direct answer.
Well, in a lot of boats, a 1% difference in boat speed is a big difference. You know, if you can sail 1% or 2% faster than the other boats, that's a huge, huge advantage on the race course. You're going to walk away from the other boats. But that is nothing compared to sailing a 5 or 10% shorter distance. So that's why we pay so much attention to the wind direction and which leg is favored, or which tack is the favored tack, and which way is the wind going to shift. Because every time you get a favorable wind shift, you sail a shorter distance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we say, you know, if you're in an oscillating wind, the thing to do is to tack on the shifts. Now, how big a shift you need before you tack depends a lot on the kind of boat you're racing.
It also depends on how close you are to the mark. The closer you are to the mark, the more you want to stay near the center of the course.
Okay.
And a lot is talked about tacking on the shifts, but jibing on the shifts is also very important, and I am still learning that one. Again, with multi-hulls, it becomes even more apparent or more important. But if you can, as you're getting headed, you're going more to the direct line. If you're getting lifted, it's kind of opposite from going upwind. You're going away from where you want to go, so that the opposite jibe is better. I talked about climbing the ladder. There was a windmill regatta. That was the Nationals, and one of the top sailors and I were off at some point, and we tacked right together, and I'm excited because I'm up with him, and he's like, you know, second, third, fourth overall all the time. And he just headed up, bore away, and just kind of walked his boat upwind of me. And I was like, how did he do that? So I, of course, went out and learned how to do that. So I'm better about being able to do that little maneuver of you bear away a little bit, get some speed, you luff up some and kind of take a little hitch up to windward, then you bear away and build your speed back up, and you kind of a scallop course that you take going upwind. It's a great skill to learn. It takes some practice and maybe seeing somebody do it. What boat do you sail, Marilyn?
Myself?
Yeah.
The Tensor so far.
Okay, yeah, well, that's a good boat, and you can certainly do that with that. You know, go sailing with Eric one day, or somebody else, and an experienced sailor, and you know, say, show me some things, and you can probably practice some of that too. Eric's scratching his head. Yeah, right. I'm going to show her anything.
So I'm a very big
until they start to beat me.
So as a total beginner, I would love to crew for any of you guys. So I'm here.
Excellent. That's a good way to learn.
Jolene, go ahead and talk her up.
So Marie Lynn completed her sailing class 2 weeks ago. She's extremely good at reading the wind. She is extremely competitive, and she is very lightweight and will be on the edge of the boat as it is hiked out. As it is heeled over, she will be hiked out with all of her weight.
And you tell me she pays attention to the wind. She
Yes.
doesn't fall off the wind when it shifts.
Correct. So on strategy, anything else to touch base before we disconnect for the night?
Jim, you're waving. Do you want to talk?
I want to go back to one thing we sort of jumped off at. We talked about pre-game strategy. And it's always important for Linda and I to get somewhere near the windward mark pre-start and turn and go downwind, get the spinnaker up, make sure nothing is tangled, and then do at least one jibe before we get down to the starting area. Because then we're a lot more relaxed and 20 minutes later when we have to put the spinnaker up on the first downwind. It's essential to run that spinnaker. That's part of the strategy. And it also gives you a good indication of the velocity, how you're going to set the spinnaker. And I realize that doesn't pertain to the catamarans, but I'll just mention it for the monohulls. It's really important.
Yeah, it's not only is it boat prep, it's crew prep. Making sure that all the equipment on the boat is rigged right and making sure that the crew is aware that things are working well and confident to do them.
And you don't have your spinnaker rigged sideways.
Correct.
I was on race committee at a regatta where it was, and I think it was at Jordan Lake actually, where the wind was up, and Dave Batchelor came around the windward mark in his Flying Scot, and his spinnaker was rigged sideways. And he came down past us on the committee boat, and I was on there with Robert Bauknight, and he had his camera with him, and I was saying, Robert, get your camera out. We got to get a picture of Dave Batchelor with his spinnaker sideways, but we didn't quite manage to get it out in time. It was past us by the time we got the camera ready. So I said, okay, this is a 2-lap race. We're going to get him on the next downwind leg. So we waited for him, had the camera out, ready. He rounded the windward mark, and danged if he hadn't re-rigged his spinnaker on the upwind leg. So the second time he passed us, it was upright.
Would you expect anything different from a good sailor, though?
Nope.
Because Dave Batchelor was Mr. Flying Scot. He was the Flying Scot dealer in the area. And I really would have loved to have had a picture of him flying his spinnaker sideways.
Anyone else? Any other strategy thoughts to share? Eric, do you know what the topic is for next Tuesday?
No.
But we do have all of the videos posted online. Good to spend time with you all. Great.
Thanks, everyone. It's been great.
Thanks.
Thanks for
God
coming
bless
and
you all.
participating.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Pleasure. Bye-bye.